Hello and welcome to Tidal Waves. This is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes on the super sewer project that's cleaning up the River Thames for generations to come. I'm your host, Ollie Woodbridge. I'm a content producer here at Tideway, and joining me to co-host this episode is Joe Phelan, editor of Tideway's internal newspaper, The Tributary. Joe, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing fabulously well, thanks Ollie. Now, in this first episode of the brand new season of Tidal Waves, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at Tideway's response to the pandemic chronologically from the day lockdown was announced through to the present day. We spoke to a range of Tideway employees to explore the innumerable difficult decisions that had to be made, often on the back of limited information. The goal of getting a complex, multifaceted civil infrastructure project back up and running without endangering the safety of the people on site, and also attempting to hit ambitious milestones and targets, as it turns out, is arguably even more challenging than that sounds.
The Tideway project isn't just building a brand new sewer to stop millions of tonnes of sewage pollution spilling into the Thames, but it's also brought with it thousands of jobs, a rejuvenated river economy, and ultimately will actually alter the landscape of the Thames as Tideway construct completely new areas of public space on the riverside. To execute a project of such size, Tideway employs more than 4,000 highly experienced professionals to deliver the project, together with its delivery partners.
When the coronavirus pandemic reached the shores of the UK earlier this year, the government was compelled to exact a stringent lockdown on society, and for millions, this meant that working from home quickly became the norm. The unprecedented nature of the lockdown also left a lot of questions unanswered, as confusion loomed as to what could and couldn't be done, especially across sectors where operating remotely simply wasn't viable. For a project like Tideway, which can't operate without having people on site both above and below ground, stopping works entirely was never anything other than a last resort.
As I'm sure you remember, nothing was definite in the first days of that initial lockdown, and during that time, Tideway officials were striving to get a definitive answer to the multi-million-pound question, can construction continue through the lockdown? So it's over the course of the last 7 months, we've been speaking to the people who had key roles in leading Tideway through their pandemic response, and it's through these conversations that we aim to accurately understand just how high the stakes were and just how much work went on behind the scenes when the vast majority of works had to be paused on this mega project.
Good evening. The Prime Minister says he is confident the country can defeat the coronavirus as long as everyone takes seriously the government's restrictions and instructions on how to live our lives for the next few months.
The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades. You must stay at home. Anyone who can't work from home, for instance, those in construction or manufacturing, should be actively encouraged to go to work.
In April of this year, just 2 weeks after the initial lockdown, I caught up with Charles Edo. Charles is the project manager at Dormey Street and King George's Park. I asked him what it was like to manage a site as the country entered into lockdown and what challenges he was immediately faced with.
So the sites were shut or temporarily closed on the 24th. So by the end of the day, on the 24th, everything was shut. Yeah, so the known unknown in this case is, well, what dates can we realistically go back on site? So what I did with my planner is we did a lot of scenarios, what if analysis on different dates for restarting works, different packages of works that we can start off with. And again, I was speaking to the contractors, section engineer, just brainstorm a few activities that we could sort of restart. And all through the period, I was listening to, I spent quite a lot of time listening to the number 10 briefings, just to get a feel for what all of this means, and especially for construction. So I've been reading up quite a lot on what the government's sort of general principles are. So using that, I was able to run a few what-if analysis and sort of just discuss with the contractors, just waiting for that ultimate decision to come as to when we can go back on site. And I think about a week or two into it, that's when the Construction Leadership Council published the site operating procedures, which was very, very helpful because it set out things that, so measures that I can put in place to be able to restart the work. So although there were a lot of uncertainties, all I personally focused on was running different scenarios, so that when we do get the green light, if you will, then we can it wouldn't be starting from zero.
So one of the people involved in the successful restart of the project after the initial 3-week stop was Tideway's Head of Safety Performance and Assurance, Paul Breslin. He spoke about the mammoth effort of preparing for and controlling the risks of COVID-19 spreading on site and the key considerations that he had to be continually mindful of.
What I've seen out on site in terms of preparing for COVID and controlling the risks of COVID spreading is absolutely phenomenal. Coincidentally, the CLC guidance and later the government guidance all seem to replicate what we were already doing on Tideway. It's almost as if maybe Andy Mitchell had taken stock of what the contractors were doing and had shared it upwards, and it's been sort of regurgitated by government, and that's exactly the kind of health and safety ethos we have. We're all about sharing the best practice, and what I've seen out on site and what's been assured as well, it's pretty incredible, pretty impressive stuff.
Despite the project temporarily shutting down for those 3 weeks, once works did ramp back up, major tunnelling milestones were still met, if slightly later than scheduled. One such milestone was the breakthrough of TBM Charlotte into the shaft at Carnworth Road, completing the tunnelling for the Frogmore Connection Tunnel. And it was shortly after that landmark breakthrough that we spoke to Sub-Agent Kaderul Kibria, who had a crucial role in developing the safety plan for works going on inside the shaft. He describes the challenging environment working inside those new safety regulations and in such close quarters.
So we were shut down for about 3 weeks. But the team, we got together, we did a lot of planning, how to get everyone back to work safely. We did have to influence the whole social distancing in this tunnel. As the tunnel was quite small, it's 2.85 meters in diameter, it was really difficult for us to manage the whole 2 meter zone. But with a lot of planning, we did manage to find a way to get around it. Within the build area, that's the only place where I'm actually sat now. It was the only really difficult area for us to manage. So we were able to limit it by wearing masks just for the 15 minutes we were building the rings. Besides that, we were able to keep everyone segregated, so everyone was safe and happy to come back to work.
Working closely alongside Kaderul was Jennifer Eyre, site engineer for the Frogmore Connection Tunnel, and she was also working on the tunnel as the pandemic hit. She discussed how the team came together to overcome the restrictive nature of these new guidelines and still managed to achieve what they set out to do.
Yeah, so one of the ways in which the team have really come together is after COVID, coming back to work, people being willing to be in work and enjoying being back at work. People have respected the fact that a lot of thought has gone into how we can do the work safely. We're wearing masks when we build our rings because that's the time when we're closer than 2 meters with each other. But actually it's great. Lots of the guys came back with a ready to go attitude, we just want to get on and build it because they take pride in their work and they like seeing progress and achieving.
The new safety measures that were developed and implemented across the project weren't just rolled out on sites, but they also applied to Tideway's crucial More by River initiative. Phil Dupree is Tideway's logistics and transshipment manager, and he oversees the Northfleet site from which construction materials, supplies and equipment are ferried via the Thames to where they're needed most. Back in May, I found out how the social distancing measures were affecting transportation of crucial construction equipment across the project.
So the main site I look after is Northfleet, which is a transshipment facility, and we generally we run the More by River side of the project of the project, which is trying to utilise the river and instead of saturating London with our construction material and suppliers vehicles, we deliver it into Northfleet and use the river as a road and load barges and ferry the equipment and machinery up to the sites using the river. And we've managed to operate using a very skeletal crew that was still existing at Blackfriars. So crane drivers slinger signallers, crane supervisors, all the people you would need in a lifting operation, APs, for example. And we still have fabrication challenges. For example, Blackfriars have their floating culvert, and there are big pieces of metal being fabricated into certain items for that floating culvert. And the fabrication can't continue if the fabrication yard hasn't got anywhere to put the bits that have just been fabricated. So we've had to open up Northfleet to allow them to overflow and store the materials in our yards. We've had barge loads since the shutdown. It's a different game completely. The social distancing guidelines and how we operate a site have changed, and that will be for a long time. I see it. I don't see that would change. We have different processes on site now that we adhere to, and we have to manage the site in a way for the safety of the operatives that work there, for our colleagues, for our friends, for everyone's there, and we take responsibility, and we take it extremely seriously, because if there are any issues on site, we take it home to our families. So we have to make sure our systems are in place that doesn't put anyone at risk.
So as spring turned to summer and summer turned to autumn, the project was back in full flow, albeit with the new site operating procedures in place, which created this vastly different working environment for the majority of those working on Tideway. Before the year began, 2020 was tipped to be the most important year so far for the Super Sewer, and it was only down to the hard work and determination of everybody working across the project that this list of construction landmarks that were due to be hit this year were in fact achieved, against the odds, one by one, as the year progressed. And now for our last guest on this episode of Tidal Waves, who is Andy Mitchell, Tideway CEO. And Andy very kindly joined us to reflect on what has been a year like no other on the project. Our conversation began by me asking how the project was looking before the first lockdown came back in March.
Well, Ollie, I mean, as you know, we'd had a great year leading up to March, one of the most important years on the project, and the year that we needed to have, and it was all looking pretty good. We'd just passed the halfway mark. We'd completed the first of the 4 main tunnel drives, Millicent at a Kirtling Street, and we were continuing our focus on health, safety and well-being, and we'd passed the peak in terms of our use of the river.
And can you tell us exactly what happened on the project at the beginning of the lockdown?
Well, seems like a long time ago now, but back in March, we paused all non-essential work at the very start, including getting the TBMs to safe stop points. But then progressively, as those early weeks went by, we began working from home where possible. There's 1,000 of us still doing that. And then site by site, we did the safety reviews and figured out what we needed to do to get us back up and running, and which has led us to where we are now.
And how would you say things have been going since the project restarted?
When I look at it, it's quite extraordinary. The teams across Tideway have reacted incredibly well, getting back to work on the vital piece of infrastructure that we know we're building, and doing it safely. And we've hit some really important milestones over the summer. The TBMs restarted works. TBM Selina arrived in London here, and TBM Annie is assembled in Greenwich. And of course, it wasn't that long ago that we celebrated the breakthrough of TBM Rachel at Acton. So it's been extraordinary.
Thanks for that, Andy. And finally, as you well know, it's been an incredibly tough year this year. And as we get to the end of it at long last, and as we approach Christmas, I wondered if you might have a Christmas message for our listeners and for the Tideway team.
2020 has been a really tough year, and we've all had good and bad moments, but let's remember to be kind on ourselves and others as we reflect on that at the end of the year. It was what it was. So for me, let's step through the rest of this year safely and gently, and rest up over the Christmas break and enjoy the time with whoever we're able to be with. There's every reason to believe that 2021 will be a better year, and together we can make it so. So to Team Tideway, all of what I've just said, and from me, a simple message, but one from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Tidal Waves. We hope this has been informative as we've aimed to sort of show you behind the curtain on what has been a remarkable year, really, on the project and how it has overcome so many challenges presented by this global pandemic. So thank you so much for listening, and of course a huge thank you to everybody who made an appearance, and of course to you, Joe, for helping me co-host.
Yeah, cheers, Ollie. Always delighted to be involved, and I look forward to chatting to you again on the next episode of Tidal Waves.